Have you ever watched a large cargo ship moving slowly out of port and noticed, just at the waterline, a thick band of dark red paint running the full length of the hull? Above it, the ship is gray, or black, or white. Below it, as the vessel rides low in the water, that strip of deep red sits at the boundary between the world above the surface and the world beneath it. It looks deliberate. It looks almost ceremonial. And it raises a question that most people standing on the dock never quite get around to asking. Every large vessel on every ocean on the planet carries that same band of color. Container ships, cruise liners, naval vessels, bulk carriers crossing the South Atlantic. They all wear red below the waterline across every nationality, every shipping company, every era of modern maritime history. The consistency is unusual enough to suggest it isn't arbitrary. The global shipping fleet moves roughly 90% of everything traded between nations. The vessels doing that work are some of the most technically sophisticated machines ever built, designed and optimized by engineers who measure efficiency in fractions of a percent. They make deliberate choices about every material on every surface. Nothing is accidental. So why red? But here's the surprising truth. The color wasn't chosen. It arrived as a consequence of chemistry, and by the time anyone had the option to change it, it had already become too practically useful to abandon. Today, we're tracing why the hulls of wooden sailing ships started rotting from the outside in, what the solution turned out to be, and how a decision made in a British naval dockyard in the 1770s ended up visible on every working vessel in the world right now. To understand this, you have to start not with paint, but with the particular nightmare of keeping a wooden hull intact in warm salt water. Wood, submerged for any length of time, becomes an ecosystem. Within weeks of a vessel entering the water, algae begin colonizing the hull surface. Barnacles follow, attaching themselves permanently and building hard calcium carbonate shells that roughen the surface and increase drag. Seaweed trails from every irregularity. And working silently through all of it, boring tunnels through the timber from the inside, is a creature called the shipworm. The shipworm is not actually a worm. It is a saltwater mollusk, elongated and pale, that uses its ridged shell to rasp through submerged wood and lives inside the tunnel it creates. A single shipworm causes minor damage. A hull infested with thousands of them over a season at sea is riddled with galleries that can reduce structural timber to something resembling a dry sponge, hollow and fragile, with almost nothing left of the original strength. For wooden sailing vessels, which might spend months or years continuously at sea between dry dock inspections, this was not a manageable inconvenience. It was an existential threat. Ships were lost not to storms or navigation errors, but to hulls that simply dissolved beneath the crew. The Royal Navy in the 18th century was losing vessels to shipworm faster than the shipyards could replace them in tropical waters. And every maritime power with ambitions beyond home waters faced the same problem. Remedies had existed for centuries: lead sheathing, tar mixtures, a paste of tallow and sulfur pressed into the seams, but none of them worked reliably or lasted long enough to protect a hull across a full ocean voyage. Think of it like trying to preserve a wooden fence post buried in wet soil using only surface coatings. Whatever you paint on top, the moisture and the organisms find a way through eventually, because the threat isn't arriving from one direction at a set speed. It's arriving from every direction simultaneously, continuously, from creatures that have been doing this for millions of years and are very good at it. What was needed wasn't a better coating. It was a material the organisms genuinely couldn't tolerate. The answer, arrived at by the British Navy after decades of experimentation, was copper. Beginning in the 1770s, warships began leaving Portsmouth and Plymouth with their hulls sheathed below the waterline in thin sheets of copper nailed directly to the timber. Copper is a natural biocide. In contact with seawater, it releases dissolved copper ions that are toxic to the organisms attempting to colonize the hull. Barnacles cannot attach to it. Shipworm cannot bore through metal. The fouling that had been slowing and destroying wooden ships for centuries was suppressed almost entirely. The practical effect on naval performance was immediate and significant. A copper-sheathed hull maintained its speed across a long voyage in a way that an unsheathed hull could not. In the naval battles of the American Revolutionary War, British copper-bottomed ships held a consistent speed advantage over opponents whose hulls had been fouling for months at sea. The material had changed the strategic balance in ways that took other navies years to fully understand and replicate. So, if copper sheathing solved the problem for wooden ships, what changed when iron and steel replaced timber in the 19th century? The answer, as is often the case in history, comes down to an interaction that nobody anticipated until it was already causing serious damage. Copper and iron submerged together in salt water form a galvanic cell. The salt water acts as an electrolyte. The two dissimilar metals act as electrodes, and an electrical current flows between them. That current accelerates the corrosion of the iron catastrophically, eating through a steel hull far faster than ordinary seawater alone would manage. Nailing copper sheets to an iron ship, which seemed like an obvious extension of what had worked on timber, actively destroyed the very hull it was meant to protect. The metal sheathing had to go. But the biological problem it had solved had not gone anywhere. Iron and steel hulls fouled just as readily as wooden ones. Engineers needed the protective chemistry of copper without the physical sheets of copper, and the solution was to dissolve the copper into paint. Copper oxide, the compound that forms when copper oxidizes, is deeply, distinctly red. Mixed into a paint formulation and applied to a hull, it leaches copper ions into the surrounding water slowly and continuously, creating the same toxic boundary layer that sheet copper had produced, without any metal-to-metal contact. The color was not a design decision. Copper oxide is red. The paint that contained it was red. The hulls painted with it were red. Modern antifouling chemistry has moved well beyond simple copper oxide formulations. Contemporary hull paints use sophisticated compounds that can be tuned to release their active ingredients at controlled rates, matched to the specific waters and speeds a vessel operates in. They can be manufactured in any color. Shipping companies and naval architects can specify whatever shade they prefer, and some do. But the majority of working vessels still carry red below the waterline, for a reason that is more practical than sentimental. The boundary between a dark upper hull and the red antifouling below the waterline creates a visible horizon line around the entire vessel. That line makes it immediately apparent, from the dock or from another vessel, how deeply the ship is sitting in the water. Load a ship too heavily, and that red band disappears beneath the surface. A vessel riding correctly shows a consistent strip of red above the waterline. The color that arrived as a chemical accident became, over 2 centuries of use, one of the most readable safety indicators in maritime practice. So, the next time you see a ship moving out of harbor with that familiar band of dark red at the waterline, you'll know what you're looking at. Not a design convention, not a maritime tradition maintained for sentiment. The residue of a specific metal's chemistry carried forward from copper sheets nailed to wooden warships in Georgian dockyards, translated into paint when the ships changed, but the problem didn't, and kept because the color turned out to do a second useful job nobody had planned for. Some solutions outlast the problems they were built to solve. This one became the problem's permanent address.